Alright, do not scroll. Do not touch that back button. Because in the next 60 seconds I'm going to hand you the single sentence that just blew up 18 months of internet mythology. And once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. For a year and a half, the biggest unofficial murder trial in hip-hop wasn't happening in a courtroom. It was happening in comment sections. It was happening on live streams at 2 in the morning. It was happening in group chats where people who have never met Chrisean Rock in their lives decided they had solved a homicide. And the verdict they reached was ugly. The verdict they reached was that Chrisean Rock killed a man to protect a bag. That was the theory. That was the whole engine. Millions of views were built on top of it. Entire channels were fed by it. And it rested on exactly one load-bearing pillar, one single assumption that everything else was stacked on. That pillar just snapped. Because on July 29th, the DNA came back. And what it said doesn't just change the story. It deletes the motive. I'll get you all the way there, but I need to walk you through this in order, because if you jump to the end, you're going to miss the part that actually matters. And the part that actually matters is the part almost nobody is talking about right now. So let's start where this really starts. Not with a rumor, with a person. His name was Karon Cann. The internet knew him as Ronny Doe. He was 24 years old. On the evening of February 3rd, 2025, in Severn, Maryland, a suburb outside Baltimore, officers responded to reports of gunshots. They found him at 7:10 p.m. Paramedics worked on him right there at the scene. He was rushed to University of Maryland, Baltimore, Washington Medical Center. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Investigators said early that this had the markings of a targeted incident. Not random, not a stray bullet, not wrong place, wrong time. Targeted. Somebody, according to the police read on it at the time, wanted this specific young man dead. That was 17 months ago, and I want you to sit in that number for a second, because everything I'm about to tell you happens on top of a case that has never been solved. Now here's the part that lit the entire internet on fire. Before he died, Karon Cann was publicly claiming that he was the biological father of Chrisean Rock's son. Chrisean Jr., he said it in interviews. He said it online. He said it loud. And he said it repeatedly. And he was demanding a paternity test. Chrisean Rock said no. Chrisean Rock has said, consistently, from the beginning, that Blueface is the father of her son. Not Karon. Blueface. And when a man who is loudly demanding a DNA test ends up shot and killed in a targeted attack, and the woman on the other side of that DNA demand is one of the most watched women on the internet, you already know what the internet did with that. You already know. The theory wrote itself in about 4 hours. The theory went like this. Chrisean Rock had a lucrative reality television situation tied to Blueface. The value of that entire arrangement depended on the story staying intact. And if a court-ordered swab came back and said the child belonged to a man from Baltimore instead of the rapper the whole brand was built on, the story dies. The money dies. The narrative dies. So, the theory concluded, Chrisean Rock had a motive worth millions to make sure that swab never happened. That's it. That's the whole architecture. Every single video, every thumbnail with the red circle and the arrow, every "she did it" comment with 2,000 likes. Every live stream that ran 4 hours long, all of it was standing on that one beam. Paternity equals motive. Pull the beam out, and the house comes down. Now watch what happened 4 days ago. On July 29th, 2026, Blueface went public and formally confirmed, with verified DNA testing in hand, that he is the biological father of Chrisean Jesus Porter. His words were about as plain as a sentence can get. The test came back, and yes, he is mine. Read that again. The test came back, and yes, he is mine. That is the rapper who spent years hedging. That is the rapper who denied it in December of 2023. That is the same rapper who, in March of this year, posted on X, and I'm quoting the post, "Junior is not my biological son," and then added, "RIP to his father Ronny," and then said he had tried his best to fill in the blanks because the biological father was no longer with us, and then said he couldn't continue the plot because it didn't feel right. That post is a huge part of why the theory metastasized the way it did. Because when the man at the center of the story publicly names a dead man as the real father, the internet doesn't hear a rumor. The internet hears a confession. The internet hears confirmation. And that March post was screenshot, clipped, reposted, and stitched into 1,000 different videos as if it were evidence. For months later, the same man says the DNA came back and the child is his. So which is it? And more importantly, how many millions of views were harvested off a claim that the person making it has now walked all the way back? Hold that thought, because it gets worse, and I mean that sincerely. It gets significantly worse. But before I show you the part that made me stop editing and just sit there for a minute, I need you to understand how this theory got built, brick by brick, because the construction process is the real story here. It did not start with police. It did not start with a leak. It did not start with a document. It started with a family member. Back in May, Chrisean Rock's own sister, the rapper Taseki, made public insinuations connecting Chrisean to the case. She didn't stand up and make a formal accusation. She did the thing that is actually far more damaging than an accusation. She gestured. She implied. She left a shape in the air and let the audience fill it in. And that is the most dangerous form this kind of thing can take, because an accusation can be challenged. An accusation can be disproven. A gesture can't. A gesture just sits there and grows. Within days, the clip economy had it. Within a week, it was thumbnails. Within a month, it was treated as background fact. The thing you didn't even have to argue anymore. The thing you just referenced in passing while you moved on to your next point. Now let me be extremely clear about something, and I want this on the record before I go one sentence further, because it matters more than any view count attached to this topic. The Anne Arundel County Police Department has not publicly identified a suspect in this case. Not one. Not a person of interest. Nothing. As of the most recent statement given to press, a department representative confirmed only this. It is an open and active investigation, and they are unable to provide any additional details. That's the actual status. That's it. That's the whole official record. Everything else you have consumed about this case for 18 months. Every theory, every timeline breakdown, every sources say, every red string on a courtboard breakdown, is somebody's interpretation. Not a finding. Not a charge. Not a court document. And Chrisean Rock has now addressed it directly, on camera, in her own words. So let's actually hear what she said, because a shocking number of people arguing about this have never listened to it once. Chrisean Rock went live and denied any connection to the killing of Karon Cann. Flatly. Not a soft denial. Not a lawyer-shaped non-answer. A flat one. And she said something in that stream that I have not seen properly reported in a single one of the 50 thumbnails I scrolled past this week. She said that during the investigation, police interviewed her on camera, recording her answers. And she said that they came away from that interview and told her, her recollection, her words, "We know you didn't do it. We got his phone." That's her account. I want to be precise about that. That is Chrisean Rock's characterization of what investigators told her. Police have not publicly confirmed or denied it, because police are not publicly commenting on anything in this case, which is exactly what you would expect from a department with an open homicide file. But her framing is worth sitting with, because it is not the framing of someone trying to shut down scrutiny. She welcomed it. She described the investigation as the fastest route to finding out who actually killed him. She said, and I'm quoting her here, "That got nothing to do with me. His death has nothing to do with me." She also addressed the version of Karon that she says she knew at the end. She said he made her life about him because he needed money. She said he was desperate. That is a harsh thing to say about someone who is dead, and I understand why it landed badly with a lot of people, and I'll get to the reaction from his side in a moment, because his side has plenty to say, and they have every right to say it. But strip the tone away and look at the structure of what she's claiming. She's claiming she was interviewed. She's claiming she was recorded. She's claiming she was cleared in the room. And she's claiming the phone, his phone, is in the hands of investigators. If any of that is accurate, then the theory that ran the internet for a year and a half was operating with less information than the woman it was accusing. Now here's where I need to slow all the way down, because this next part is the whole reason this video exists. Karon Cann's family is still out here. They are still grieving a 24-year-old. And as recently as this week, members of his family have been publicly pushing back, going directly at Chrisean Rock, going at the way this is being discussed, going at the entire circus that has grown up around a young man's death. And I want you to really hear what that means. There is a mother somewhere. There are sisters. There is a grandmother. This was, by multiple accounts, the only boy in his bloodline. And for 18 months, the death of that young man has been the raw material for a content industry, including, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, including corners of the industry I am standing in right now. That's uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable. Sit in it with me for a second instead of scrolling past it. Because here's the thing that should genuinely bother every single person watching this. In 18 months of nonstop coverage, in 18 months of theories, breakdowns, timelines, thumbnails, 4-hour streams, and comment sections with 15,000 replies, the amount of that energy that has been aimed at actually finding who pulled the trigger is close to zero. All of it went into the celebrity. None of it went into the case. And that is not an accident. That is an economic decision made 10,000 times a day by people who understand that Chrisean Rock's name in a title moves numbers and Karon Cann's name does not. Let me say his name again, since we're here. Karon Cann, 24, Severn, Maryland, February 3rd, 2025, 7:10 in the evening. Still unsolved. Now let's talk about the other man in this, because Blueface's role in how this spiraled is not passive. Not even a little bit. Go back to the timeline and watch how it actually moves, because the pattern is almost too clean. September 2023, the child is born. Chrisean Rock gives birth on Instagram Live. Months later, in December of 2023, Blueface publicly denies being the father. First denial. Then February 2025, days after Karon Cann is killed, Chrisean Rock uploads paternity test results to her son's Instagram account. Results that appeared to show Blueface as the father. And the timing of that post became its own scandal, its own accusation, its own cottage industry of speculation, with people demanding to know why that particular document surfaced at that particular moment. Then November 2025, Blueface is on a live stream and calls Chrisean Jr. his son while fielding questions about the paternity test. Claim. Then March 2026, Blueface goes on X and denies it again. Publicly, in writing, naming a dead man as the real father. Denial. Then July 2026, DNA in hand, Blueface confirms it. Confirmation. Deny. Claim. Deny. Confirm. Now you tell me, is that a man wrestling honestly with a painful private question in public? Or is that a man who figured out a very long time ago that the question itself is the product? Because every single one of those pivots generated a news cycle. Every single one of them generated headlines, clips, reaction videos, stitches, duets, streams. Every single one of them put both of their names back into circulation at the exact moment the algorithm was starting to forget them. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I can read the man's mind. I can't. Nobody can. But I can read a pattern, and so can you. And that pattern is not subtle. And here's the detail that pushes it past coincidence for me. In that March post, Blueface didn't just deny paternity. He used the word plot. He said he couldn't continue the plot. That's the word he chose. Plot. Not situation. Not relationship. Not truth. Plot. That is storytelling vocabulary. That is a word people use when they are describing a narrative they are constructing, not a life they are living. And 4 months later, the same story reversed itself with a lab result attached. So let's do the math the internet refused to do. If Blueface is the biological father, confirmed, tested, verified, stated publicly by him, then Karon Cann was not the biological father. And if Karon Cann was not the biological father, then a court-ordered paternity test would not have destroyed anybody's television deal. It would have confirmed the deal. It would have ended the dispute in Chrisean Rock's favor. Which means the $1 million motive, the entire spine of the theory, the thing that made this feel like a true crime case instead of internet noise, never actually existed in the first place. Say it slower. The motive people spent 18 months describing in forensic detail required a fact that has now been formally contradicted by DNA. Now, before the comment section catches fire, let me steelman the other side, because I'm not here to run defense for anybody and I want this to be honest. Someone will say, the motive doesn't need to be true, it only needs to have been believed. And that's actually a fair argument. In a criminal context, a motive can be based on a false belief. If a person genuinely feared an outcome, the fear itself can drive behavior even if the underlying fear was wrong. Fine. That's a legitimate point, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But it cuts both directions, and here's how. The person with the least reason to fear a paternity test is the person who already knows the answer. And by every account, including Blueface's own reversal, Chrisean Rock has been saying the same thing about her son's father since day one, without deviation, through every denial, through every headline, through every wave of ridicule. She never changed her story. He changed his 3 times. So which one of those 2 people was behaving like someone with something to lose? Sit with that. Because I promise you it is not the answer most of the internet has been operating on. Let me go back to something I skipped, because it's been bothering me since I started pulling this together. The mall. About a month after Karon Cann began publicly claiming paternity, he reportedly approached Chrisean Rock in public, at a mall, while she was out with her infant son. Police were called. It escalated. It was filmed, because everything is filmed, and the footage went everywhere. And that clip became one of the most recycled pieces of evidence in the entire theory. It got dropped into videos as proof of conflict, proof of tension, proof of a confrontation that supposedly explains what came later. But watch what that clip actually is when you strip the narration off. It's a young man in visible distress, in a public place, insisting that a child is his. Whatever you think about the wisdom of doing that at a mall, that is not the behavior of a man executing a scheme. That is the behavior of a man who believed something and could not get anyone to take him seriously. And now, with the DNA in, we know he was almost certainly wrong. Which reframes the entire clip, doesn't it? It stops being footage of a threat and starts being footage of a tragedy. A 24-year-old who believed a thing that wasn't true, chased it in the most public way possible, made himself a national punchline doing it, and then was shot to death in a Maryland suburb 4 weeks later by someone the police still have not identified. That's not a plot twist. That's just sad. That's a whole life, gone, and the last chapter of it that most people will ever see is a shaky vertical video of him being escorted out of a shopping center. And I want to be careful here, because there's a version of this video where I use that to score a point, and I'm not doing that. The fact that he was wrong about paternity does not make his death less serious. It does not make him less of a person. It does not make his family's grief a footnote. If anything, it makes the whole thing heavier, because he died in the middle of a fight he was never going to win. Now let's deal with the thing everybody actually clicked for, and I'm not going to dance around it. Does the DNA result mean Chrisean Rock is innocent of everything the internet accused her of? No, that is not what a paternity test does. A paternity test establishes paternity. That's it. It is not an alibi. It is not a police finding. It does not close a homicide file. What it does, and this is the precise, honest version, is remove the specific motive that the specific theory depended on. The accusation can still exist as a bare accusation. It just no longer has the story attached to it that made it feel coherent. And a bare accusation with no motive, no charge, no named suspect, and no evidence in the public record is not a case. That's a rumor wearing a case's clothes. Meanwhile, and here's the part that should genuinely make you angry, the actual homicide is going nowhere. 17 months. 18 now. An open and active investigation, per the department. No publicly identified suspect. No person of interest. No arrest. A family in Maryland waking up every single day to the same silence they woke up to on February 4th, 2025. And the machine that could have generated 100 million impressions of pressure on that case instead spent all of it arguing about a paternity dispute between 2 reality television personalities. That is the failure here. That is the actual scandal. Not the theory. The misallocation. Let me put it in the bluntest terms I can. If even a fraction of the energy that went into building a murder case against Chrisean Rock in the comments section had gone into keeping Karon Cann's name in front of the Anne Arundel County Police Department, this case might not be sitting cold in month 18. Instead, we turned a homicide into a subplot in somebody's relationship drama. Now, I told you it gets worse, and this is the part. Even now, even this week, even with the DNA confirmed and the story formally reversed, the content did not slow down. It sped up. In the last 7 days alone, the ecosystem produced a fresh wave. Chrisean Rock leaking private text messages from Blueface. Blueface allegedly flying to Miami. Members of Karon Cann's family firing back at Chrisean Rock publicly. Streams running 2.5 hours deep. Titles with the word arrested in them for a person who has not been arrested, charged, or named. Let me repeat that, because it deserves its own breath. There are titles circulating right now, today, telling audiences that Chrisean Rock is about to be arrested, about a woman against whom no charge exists, in a case where police have publicly stated they cannot even confirm a suspect. That's not journalism. That's not commentary. That's not even gossip. That's manufacturing. and I'd be a hypocrite if I pretended I existed outside that ecosystem. So I'm going to say the quiet part with my whole chest. The reason those titles exist is because they work. The reason they work is because you and I click them. Every single one of us, including me. That's the transaction. That's the deal we've all silently agreed to. The difference, the only difference that actually matters, is whether the thing inside the video tells you the truth once you get there. So here's the truth, laid out clean, with nothing decorative on it. 1. Karon Cann, 24 years old, was shot and killed in Severn, Maryland, on February 3, 2025. Police described it as targeted. The case remains unsolved. 2. Before his death, he publicly claimed to be the father of Chrisean Rock's son. Chrisean Rock consistently denied it and consistently named Blueface. 3. On July 29, 2026, Blueface publicly confirmed, citing verified DNA testing, that he is the biological father. 4. No suspect has been publicly identified in Karon Cann's murder. Chrisean Rock has publicly denied any involvement and stated that investigators told her she was not responsible. 5. Everything else, every motive breakdown, every timeline theory, every she's getting arrested next week, is unsourced speculation dressed up as reporting. Those 5 facts are the entire verified spine of this story. Everything else is upholstery. Now let me get into the part one think is genuinely the most disturbing thing about this whole saga, and it has nothing to do with any of the people whose names are in the title. It's about how fast a fully formed criminal narrative can be built out of nothing but vibes, proximity, and a family member's insinuation. Think about the raw materials here. One relative implies something in May. A dead man had made a paternity claim. A woman had a television deal. That's it. That is the entire evidentiary basis for a theory that eventually convinced hundreds of thousands of people that a specific named individual committed a specific murder for a specific dollar amount. No document, no leak, no witness, no filing, no official statement. Nothing you could take into any room in America and call evidence. And it worked so well that when the underlying fact was contradicted by a laboratory, the theory didn't die. It just quietly changed shape and kept moving, because at this point the theory has its own economy, and economies don't like to shut down. That should scare you. Not because of Chrisean Rock. Because of the mechanism. Because that mechanism does not check credentials at the door. It can be pointed at anybody, including people who don't have a platform to answer back with. Now let's talk about Chrisean Rock the person for a minute, because I think both the defenders and the prosecutors in this thing have flattened her into a cartoon, and neither cartoon is useful. Chrisean Rock is not a sympathetic figure to most of the internet, and she has spent years making sure of that. She has built a public identity out of chaos. She has monetized volatility. She has done things on camera that most people would not do in private. There is a very long list of legitimate criticisms a person could make about Chrisean Rock's public conduct, and I am not going to stand here and pretend that list doesn't exist, because it does, and pretending otherwise would insult your intelligence. But here's what I've noticed, and I think it's the psychological key to this entire story. Because Chrisean Rock is disliked, the standard of proof required to believe something terrible about Chrisean Rock dropped to approximately 0. That's the mechanism. That's the actual mechanism. It isn't evidence. It's permission. The audience already didn't like her, so when the accusation arrived, it didn't have to clear a bar. It just had to arrive. And that is how the worst outcomes in this space happen. Not because people are stupid, because people are consistent. We believe bad things about people we've already decided are bad, and we do it faster and with less scrutiny than we'd ever apply to someone we like. So let me ask the uncomfortable question directly. If this exact accusation, same non-evidence, same insinuation from a relative, same coincidental timing, had been aimed at a beloved public figure with a clean image, would it have survived a single weekend? You already know the answer. It would have been laughed off the platform by Sunday. That is not a defense of her character. It is an indictment of ours. Now, the religion angle, because it comes up constantly, and I think it's being read completely wrong by almost everybody. Over the past stretch, Chrisean Rock has leaned publicly and heavily into faith, talking about God, talking about deliverance, talking about spiritual attack, talking about being targeted by forces she believes are working against her. And the internet's response to that has been almost universally cynical. People decided immediately that it's a strategy, a rebrand, A legal shield. Damage control with a cross on it. Maybe. I genuinely don't know. Nobody watching a stream can audit somebody's soul. But I'll offer you a different reading, and you can take it or leave it. When a person's entire public life has been reduced to a running trial in which every stranger on earth is a juror, the instinct to reach for something bigger than the internet is not automatically a scam. Sometimes that's just what a cornered person does. Sometimes that's the only room left where the verdict isn't already in. You don't have to find it convincing. I'm just saying there's a version of that behavior that isn't calculated, and the fact that almost nobody even considered it tells you how far past fair hearing this has traveled. All right, deep breath, because now I want to close the loop I opened at the very top, and I want to close it properly. I told you at the beginning that one sentence detonated 18 months of internet mythology. That sentence is Blueface confirmation that the DNA came back and the child is his. And I told you that once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it, and here's why. Because that sentence retroactively rewrites every single video ever made about this case. All of them, including ones with millions of views. Including ones from creators far bigger than me. Including, let's be fully honest, the general lane of coverage that I operate in. Every breakdown that said she had $1 million reason was built on an assumption that has now been formally contradicted. Every thumbnail that put her face next to Karon Cann's with a question mark between them was selling a connection the underlying facts do not support. Every stream that spent 4 hours performing amateur forensics was performing amateur forensics on a premise that was wrong. And not one of those videos is going to be deleted. Not one of them is going to get a correction. Not one of them is going to get a pinned comment saying, update. The central claim in this video turned out to be false. They're just going to sit there. Forever. Racking up views from people who find them 6 months from now and have no idea the ground moved. That's the part nobody wants to talk about. The internet has an infinite memory for accusations and absolutely no memory for retractions. So let me do the thing that almost nobody in this space does, and let me be extremely direct about the standard I'm holding myself to right here. I do not know who killed Karon Cann. Neither do you. Neither does the loudest person in your comment section. Neither does the streamer who ran 6 hours on it last night. And critically, as of this moment, publicly, neither does the Arundel County Police Department, or at least they are not saying. What I know is that a 24-year-old man is dead, that the police called it targeted, that 18 months have passed, that no one has been publicly named, and that his family is still waiting. And what I know is that the woman a large portion of the internet convicted in absentia has never been charged with anything related to it, has denied it directly and on the record, and has now had the central motive attributed to her contradicted by a laboratory result announced by the one person best positioned to know. That's the honest ledger. Everything else is theater. Now here's where I'm going to complicate it one more time, because I refuse to leave you with a clean bow on something that does not have one. The DNA confirmation does not answer the biggest remaining question in this entire story, and the biggest remaining question is not about Chrisean Rock at all. It's this. Why was a targeted shooting of a young man in a Maryland suburb, a case the police themselves described as deliberate, allowed to go 18 months without a single publicly identified suspect, in the most heavily documented celebrity-adjacent death of the last 2 years? Think about the surface area here. This man had been in viral videos. His face was known. His claims were public. His confrontation with Chrisean Rock was filmed. His social media was picked apart by hundreds of thousands of people. Chrisean Rock herself says investigators have his phone. There is arguably no ordinary homicide victim in America whose final months are more thoroughly documented than Karon Cann's. And still, nothing. So the real question isn't, did she do it? The real question is, with that much documentation, that much attention, and that much public interest, why is this case still open? I don't have that answer. I want to be clear that I don't. But I think it is the only question left that actually matters. And I think it's the one question the entire content economy around this story has managed to avoid asking for 1.5 years straight, because it doesn't have a celebrity face attached to it, and it doesn't make a good thumbnail. Let me bring this all the way home, and then I've got 3 questions for you that I actually want answered, not rhetorically. I'm going to be reading these. Here's the shape of the whole thing, viewed from above. A young man named Karon Cann believed he had a son. He was almost certainly wrong. He pursued that belief in the loudest, most public, most self-destructive way available to a person in 2024, and it cost him his reputation before anything else happened to him. Then, in February of 2025, someone shot him and killed him, and the police called it targeted, and that person has never been publicly identified. Chrisean Rock, who had been saying the same thing about her son's paternity since before any of this started, was placed at the center of a murder narrative on the strength of a relative's insinuation and a coincidence of timing. She has denied it directly. She says she was interviewed and cleared in the room. No charge has ever been filed. No suspect has ever been named. Blueface, the actual load-bearing figure in the paternity question, denied, claimed, denied again, and then finally confirmed with a test, generating a fresh viral cycle at every single stop along the way, and using the word plot to describe the arrangement while he was in the middle of it. And the internet, us, all of us, took a dead 24-year-old and turned him into set dressing in a reality show storyline. That's the story. That's actually the story, not the murder theory. The story is what we did with a murder. Now, I want to leave you with the thing I keep coming back to, because I've been sitting with it for a couple of days, and it hasn't gotten easier. There is a woman in Maryland who is somebody's mother, and her son is dead, and for 18 months the biggest platform available for information about her son's death has been used almost exclusively to argue about a rapper's paternity dispute. Every time her son's name trends, it trends attached to somebody else's brand. Every time there's a development, the development is about Chrisean Rock or Blueface, not about the case. And she is still waiting on a phone call from Anne Arundel County that has not come. If you take one thing out of this video, let it be his name, said correctly, on its own, without anybody else's attached to it. Karon Cann, 24 years old. February 3rd, 2025. Severn, Maryland. Still unsolved. That's not a thumbnail. That's a person. All right. 3 questions, and I mean it about the comments. I read them, and this is the topic where I actually want to hear you. Question 1. Now that the DNA has come back and Blueface has confirmed the child is his, does the murder theory die completely for you? Or do you think the motive existed independently of the paternity question? Be honest. And if you're changing your position, say so out loud, because almost nobody does that, and it's the most respectable thing a person can do in a story like this. Question 2. Who do you hold more responsible for how far this spiraled? Blueface, for reversing his story publicly 4 separate times and calling it a plot. Chrisean Rock's sister, for insinuating something she never actually stated? Or the creators, streamers, and channels who turned an unsolved homicide into 18 months of recurring revenue? Pick one. Defend it. Question 3. And this is the one I actually care about most. Should there be any standard at all for putting the word arrested or the word charged in a title about a person who has been neither? Or is that just the game now, and anyone who complains about it is being naive about how the platform works? I genuinely don't have a settled answer on that last one, and I'm not going to pretend I do. I know what I think I should say. I also know what the numbers do when somebody else says the other thing. That tension is real, and I'd rather admit it than perform a moral clarity I don't fully have. And listen, if you're new here, this is the lane. No manufactured outrage, no invented sources, no telling you somebody's going to jail on Tuesday because it moves a thumbnail. Just what's actually confirmed, what's actually claimed, and a clear line drawn between the two so you always know which one you're looking at. One last thing before I let you go, and it's the thread I'd follow next if you want to stay ahead of this. Watch what happens to the paternity story now that it's officially settled. Because a settled question generates no content, and this ecosystem does not tolerate a settled question for very long. So watch for the next reframe. Watch for somebody to start questioning the test itself. Watch for a news source to appear claiming the lab was wrong, or the sample was switched, or the announcement was strategic. I'd put money on it showing up within 30 days, because the machine needs the question open, and the machine will reopen it if reality won't. And when that happens, when the DNA test was fake video drops, I want you to remember that you watched this one first, and I want you to ask that creator the only question that matters. Show me the document, not a screenshot of a screenshot, not sources close to the situation. The document. If they can't produce it, you already know what you're looking at. That's the whole plate. Karon Cann, 24, Severn, Maryland, February 3rd, 2025, still unsolved. And if this ever cracks, I'll be right back here with it. and I'll tell you exactly what's confirmed and exactly what isn't, same as always. Catch me on the next one.